Welcome to another edition of TPA Talks. Today we'll be joined by Christopher Snowden, the head of lifestyle economics at the Institute of Economic Affairs, to talk about the rise of the nanny state and what it means for taxpayers. We hope you enjoy. So Chris, you've just published the 5th annual edition of the Nanny State Index. You said it was the most depressing one to compile. Why is that?
Everyone's more depressing than the previous one. It's actually biennial these days. But yeah, it's the 5th edition, 30 countries, European countries, and we rank them in line with over-regulation, food, soft drinks, vaping, tobacco, alcohol. And yeah, I mean, the reason it's depressing is because there's so little liberalisation from year to year and so many new policies. And you would think last few years that governments are too busy with other things to bother with really quite petty regulation of people's lifestyles. But apparently not. It just, it keeps on steaming through. Noticeably taxes, on vape juice, particularly. I think about half the country's got taxes on e-cigarette fluid now. Can't remember exactly how many. Getting on for half have got taxes on sugary drinks and indeed artificially sweetened drinks. But most of the countries that tax sugary drinks also tax soft drinks which have no sugar in. So this is fairly obviously a revenue-raising project rather than a public health project. Even if you think artificial sweeteners are an improvement, which the World Health Organization has now decided it might not be. So yeah, it's just one thing after another. Everything just gets more oppressive. I can list you very quickly all the liberalisation that's happened in Europe in the last 2 years, because there's only 3 examples of them, and two are extremely small. Norway repealed its sugar tax, which was good. Slovakia slightly relaxed its alcohol advertising laws. And Spain, which you might think we've got relaxed about alcohol, it performs pretty well on the Nanny State Index in general. But they're quite uptight about spirits advertising. But they have legalised spirits advertising on TV, but only between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. Not a massive market there, but I mean, it's better than nothing, isn't it?
But the UK has moved up in the rankings from 12th to 11th, so quite modest. But what's driving the UK's gradual rise up the table?
Boris Johnson's food regulation. So it's going to go up more because a lot of that regulation hasn't come in yet. But we've got the ban on putting so-called junk food at the end of aisles in shops and in the entrance and at the checkout. I had to set up a new category for that because no other country's done it, and the plan is still to ban advertising for this massive range of food products on TV before 9 p.m. and online at all, with admittedly an exemption for small companies. So there's that stuff all to come, and it will go up further. The UK is now the second worst country for food and soft drink regulation. It's top, which it means worst if you're liberally minded at all. It's top for tobacco over-regulation. The only saving grace really is e-cigarettes. UK and Ireland are at the bottom of the table for e-cigarette regulation because they haven't really gold-plated what the EU forced us to do. But of course that could be changing soon, because there's a big panic about disposable vapes in particular. So yeah, I mean, some people have said, well, it's quite surprising that the UK is only 11th, but it's purely because of the e-cigarette thing. Mm-hmm. If it wasn't for the e-cigarettes, then it would be in the top 5, I think.
Yeah, well, at the moment we do, seem to have a good story to tell on e-cigarettes. But is that sort of time limited? Because there's given the direction of travel and the discussions around e-cigarettes and media reporting. I mean, of course, we've seen the NHS giving out e-cigarettes to people who are trying to quit smoking. But other than that, the reporting seems to be moving towards slightly more paternalistic kind of points of view. Do you think we're still going to be having that good story to tell about vaping and e-cigarettes next year or the year after?
The current trajectory suggests probably yes, we will. I don't think the government's going to do anything drastically stupid on this. I thought that the plan announced by Neil O'Brien a few weeks ago was actually pretty sensible. That involved the Swap to Stop campaign of giving people free vapes to help get off smoking. That was pretty good. The government isn't planning on doing much more in terms of regulation. But as you say, there has been a big panic recently. The disposable vape market, particularly, a couple of companies, one in particular, which I won't name, it has dragged down the reputation of the category, it has to be said. We've been very good on vaping and people I think the general public generally understand the harm reduction argument for vaping. We haven't banned it indoors, which quite a few countries have. About half the countries in the Nanny State Index have banned it indoors. We haven't done that. And the anti-smoking groups, quite surprisingly actually, have held the line on this. So even Action on Smoking and Health, which is not the most libertarian organisation in the country by any means, even they are against banning disposable vapes. I mean, it's obviously possible that that will happen. We're reaching a point now in the UK and various other countries where it was always going to happen, that you're going to end up having the kids who 10 years ago would have smoked are now vaping instead. Now that is a win, obviously, okay, in terms of health, but compared to a sort of fantasy universe in which no kids smoke or vape, it's not a win. It seems like it's a bit worse, right? And I think most people would probably agree it's not a great thing for loads of kids to be getting addicted to nicotine. They shouldn't be getting hold of e-cigarettes. And the government's stance of let's put some more money into trading standards and get them to actually enforce the laws that already exist is the right one. And that's really where this problem has come about. Far too many retailers are happy to sell vapes to kids, but that's already illegal. Further regulation that's going to hinder uptake amongst adults is not the way to go on this. But we are where we are with it. As I say, we've got to that point where it was always going to happen, and it's actually a positive thing, but it doesn't feel like a positive thing because parents and teachers quite understandably kind of just think, well, hang on, if vapes were not available or were banned or whatever, then I wouldn't have all these kids vaping. And they don't really see the counterfactual of actually a lot of those kids would have been smoking.
So you don't see us maybe going the way of Australia and introducing those sorts of draconian measures?
Well, Australia is an object lesson on what not to do. I've heard a few people recently say we should copy Australia and ban these things. Well, look at the state of how things are in Australia. Australia is, I think, the only country that's got high and rising levels of underage vaping and high and rising levels of underage smoking. It's the only place actually where you have seen this gateway effect that people talk about. You don't see it anywhere else. Yes, you have too many underage people in this country vaping, but the smoking rate is extremely low, and that's not a coincidence. In Australia, they managed to have problems with both of them at the same time, because essentially they've created a black market because e-cigarettes containing nicotine have always been illegal in Australia, always. Then the government, that didn't work, so the government banned the importation of them for personal use. Now it's banning them outright, even if they don't contain nicotine. And that won't work either, because these products they're not legal to start with. They never have been. They've been illegally sold to kids who, they shouldn't be getting them anywhere. And the vapes themselves are not regulated because you've got a black market. And so you have a huge black market with e-cigarettes, and some of those products do contain things that you don't want to be vaping, heavy metals and so on, and you've got a big black market with tobacco, and you've got a smoking rate that's not really dropping, and in fact seems to be rising amongst teenagers. So do not, under any circumstances, copy Australia. They've made an absolute hash of it.
And then on the tobacco side of things, we are the most paternalistic country in the index for our approach to tobacco. And you've got very, very high taxes on tobacco, which drives the prices up. And you're speaking about black markets in Australia with their bans of nicotine vapes there. Surely such high taxes on tobacco in the UK are driving people into the black market here.
Yeah, but the trouble is we don't really know how many. The government isn't really, and hasn't been for years, made any real attempt to work out the size of the black market. I think the government would rather not know what the true size of the black market is. All I can say, kind of anecdotally, is I actually do pay attention when I see an empty pack of cigarettes on the pavement. And I do notice that very often they are not in plain packaging. They haven't got a health warning in English even a lot of the time. In the old days, they used to go around football stadiums after games, sweep up all the cigarette packs and see which ones were legit. And you get actually quite a good estimate from doing that. You can still do that by going through the bins. But it's just a bit more expensive than what the government actually does, which is make a very bold guess, really, at how many cigarettes are being smoked, and then works out how many cigarettes are being sold legitimately, and then looks at the difference. And that's the tobacco tax cap. Even using that system, which I'm quite sure underestimates the size of the black market, it's still big. It's still like nearly half of all rolling tobacco is not being sold and taxed in a shop. And I forget what the figure is for ready-made cigarettes, but it's at least 1 in 10. You know, it's a big market. It's £2 or £3 billion, even by the government's own estimate. They're missing out on from tax revenue, and it's going to get a lot worse because we've just seen in the budget the tobacco tax escalator, which is inflation plus 2%. That's been going on for years. So you've got inflation at 10%. So straight away that's going up by 12%. And with rolling tobacco, it's inflation plus 6% for some reason. And it's the rolling tobacco which is the most smuggled, part of the market. People will tend to go from kind of premium cigarettes to cheaper cigarettes to rolling tobacco to the black market. That's kind of how things go. So the government is hugely increasing the price of rolling tobacco, which really doesn't give people anywhere else to go apart from the black market. So we're going to see a growing problem, but it won't be properly measured, I don't think.
And it'll be disproportionately people on lower incomes who are having to turn to the black market because they can't just suck up the cost of the extra taxes.
Oh, that's right, yeah. But I mean, at least, you've got to see it from their point of view. I mean, why there's such a thing as tax morale, as I'm sure you guys know. It's an important reason why you get black markets is in anything, including labour and stuff, is if people don't feel good about paying taxes. If they don't feel that the tax rate is fair and they don't feel that the money is being spent wisely, people feel much less morally obligated to obey the law and pay the tax. And tax morale amongst smokers must be absolutely appalling because they know they're being basically exploited. So why would you feel the need to pay tax at an unbelievable rate on a product when the government is just going to continue vilifying you anyway?
And on food and soft drinks, on that measurement, we, as you said, on our, I think we're the second most paternalistic country on the index.
Yeah, just below Hungary.
Is there evidence that the advertising and promotion bans are working to curb obesity in the UK or anywhere else in the index?
No, not at all. I mean, Hungary, as I say, that's number one. I think Hungary is the fattest country in Europe. I know it's got an even higher obesity rate than we have, and ours is pretty high. So they have a very extensive range of taxes on all sorts of foods high in fat and sugar and salt and so on. And it doesn't seem to be working, and that tax has been in place for 12 years now, so you would hope to see some sort of effect from it, but no, obesity has not fallen in Hungary. None of these things are going to work. The evidence from is unbelievably poor, actually. If you actually look at what the evidence is, for example, for banning internet advertising for food that's high in fat, sugar and salt, it's laughable, really. And the fact that no other countries have really done this means that you've got even less evidence. At least if a few countries have tried it out, you could look at their experience. But we really are, I don't think people in this country realise, you read a lot from the campaigners saying that the government's dragging its heels on obesity because it's delayed some of these policies due to the state of the economy and inflation. But if you compare us to nearly anywhere else, we're trying things no one else has tried. This, like they say, this stuff about putting the food around the aisles and the checkouts and so on. To my knowledge, no country has brought in that restriction. I had to create that category in the Nanny State Index because the UK was doing it first. I don't think there's any, I could be wrong, I don't think there's any countries that have the kind of food advertising restrictions that the government is looking to bring in next year. So we are doing stuff that is unprecedented and actually really exceptionally draconian, really, by the standards of any other country.
And another food policy you referred to in the index is the introduction of mandatory calorie counts on menus. Even if that might not help to curb obesity in the United Kingdom, is there an argument that it's good for consumers to have access to that information when making choices about what they're buying in restaurants?
Yeah, I mean there is, and we don't actually include that in the Nanny State Index because we don't include everything in the Nanny State Index, right? And we don't include every public health policy designed to reduce consumption of various unhealthy products as Nanny State is. There's some policies, we look at it as economists, and sometimes there is a justification for government action. And information asymmetry is one of those. If you believe that the public are kind of systematically misled about what's in a product, I mean, the obvious example would be cigarettes in the 1950s, right? People didn't think that cigarettes cause cancer. They might have read the studies, but most people still didn't really believe it. And I think in that instance, it made sense to put a warning on the box. But there's not actually that many examples of that kind of thing. But yeah, calories, I think you could probably make a good argument, and then there may well be evidence for it, that people don't know. They certainly don't know exactly how many calories are in a product. Obviously, I would say most people broadly know enough to know that, a lemon meringue pie is not really a health food, and celery is quite low in calories. But yeah, you don't know exactly. Maybe people don't know exactly how much how many calories are in a glass of wine or a pint of beer. But again, are people over consuming that, thinking that there aren't any calories at all? I don't know. But my point is, there are cases where maybe that information could be useful, and simply putting the number of calories discreetly on a menu, there is an argument for it. But in this, it's more of a sort of pragmatic, unintended consequences issue, in that it really does seem to trigger people with eating disorders, and eating disorder charities are really upset about this this policy. And I've spoken to people myself who have kind of relapsed directly as a result of seeing how many calories there are on food. The reason being, people who've got eating disorders are, when they're in recovery, they're told not to focus on calories. Don't keep counting the calories all the time. Try and just enjoy your food, So although I don't think it is nanny state per se, there are issues around that. It will be interesting to see whether it makes any difference to obesity. I suspect it probably won't. It seems to me that people look at the menu and go, "Oh my God, I didn't know there's that many calories in it," but order it anyway.
And on alcohol, we're about mid-table, and a large chunk of that is driven by our high alcohol taxes. On minimum pricing, you've written a lot about how it's working out in Scotland and Wales. Do you think there's any chance we'll see that spread to England now or in the next few years?
Not under this government. I mean, the Tories basically kicked into long grass 10 years ago, and there's been no real attempt to revive it. Public Health England had a go, but the government ignored them. I've no idea what the Labour Party are planning on doing in this area. Alcohol isn't really on the top of anyone's list in terms of public health these days. When I first started writing about this stuff in the sort of late noughties, it was a big issue. But since then, you've seen a fall in consumption. It's not really seen as a priority compared to things like underage vaping and obesity, especially. So I would be surprised. I mean, and they certainly shouldn't do if they look at the evidence from Scotland and Wales. There actually hasn't been any evidence I know of, no proper evaluations from Wales, but I can tell you that the number of alcohol-related deaths in Wales and England have matched completely. They're exactly the same since minimum pricing came in Wales. Scotland, the evidence is a little bit more varied, but most of it is quite clearly showing that there's been a small reduction in alcohol consumption, but not amongst the heavy drinkers who are supposed to be targeted by this intervention. Several studies have shown that. And in terms of like evaluating it, the health outcomes, there hasn't been an effect on crime, hasn't been an effect on A&E attendances, hasn't been an effect on hospital admissions. You can look at the mortality and go, there was a dip in the first year of minimum pricing. It wasn't a particularly big dip, but yeah, it's consistent with minimum pricing working. But then you had COVID, and just, everywhere in the UK, alcohol-related deaths spiked enormously, and they spiked enormously in Scotland as well. So I think the evidence is not at all favourable to minimum unit pricing. It was sold as being not quite a silver bullet, but it was sold as being the single most effective policy that Scotland could introduce to tackle excessive alcohol consumption, alcohol-related harm. They won a case at the UK Supreme Court on that exact argument. But you look at the figures now and you go, well, if that's the most effective alcohol policy, then we might as well give up on alcohol policies.
So, as you said, the kind of sort of temperance movement has died back a little bit in the UK. What do you think are the main policy areas within the kind of Nanny State Index that may drive the UK's rise or fall on the table in future Nanny State Indexes?
Well, I mean, for food, as I said before, if the government insists on bringing in these so-called anti-obesity policies, which I think it has to be some doubt about it, are they actually going to ban buy one, get one free deals in October with food inflation being in double digits? It seems political suicide to me, but that's the default. That's what will happen unless the government explicitly decides to postpone it again, or better still, cancel it. So there's that. I mean, in the short term, we've got a big hike in alcohol taxes coming in August. A lot of people have forgotten about this, but unfortunately they're all going up by inflation, which is, do they use CPI or RPI for this? Either way, it's double digits. And who knows what if Labour get in West Street and decides to ban smoking, I guess we'll have to create a new category for that as well.
Chris, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, thank you to Christopher Snowden for joining us today. If you'd like to find out more about the Nanny State Index, you can read it all online at nannystateindex.org. And if you enjoyed today's episode of TPA Talks, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you.